We are told Vaasthu Shastras come with Vedic sciences, inverted quotes, and this has come to India after the Aryans have invaded India or migrated to India, whatever, 1500 BC, and Dholavira is clearly something pre-Vedic, but then we are seeing elements of Vaasthu Shastra over here. Coins from Karnataka in a place called Kuntala, 600 BC to 450 BCE, on those coins you see compound pulleys. And these kind of compound pulleys have been used in Konark also to build a temple. But we are told compound pulleys were an invention of Archimedes. Very first evidence comes to Rig Veda itself. If we ask, did India have a maritime culture? Yeah. We see that there have been a lot of merchant guilds in ancient India. The first thing that we find evidence is there, at least from Surya Siddhanta. It tells you how many revolutions of the heavenly bodies in one Chaturyuga. One Chaturyuga is 4.32 million years. Every Siddhanta practitioner knew this is a fundamental thing, understanding how many revolutions in a Mahayuga. What you should understand when looking at this is enormous intellectual tradition was there, at least for the time of Aryabhatta, at least for the time of Surya Siddhanta. We are told that everything was copied from Ptolemy. Even in Ptolemy's time, the epicycle model of the Greeks shows so much of error, whereas the Indian epicycle model is much, much less in error. It appears that in 5000 BC, the parameters given in the Surya Siddhanta seem to be the best in that time frame. We were told that Aryans brought iron into India from Central Asia in 1500 BC, but in India you're finding iron much earlier. So why did I even select this subject? I've been coming to Sangam talks for several years now and talking on a variety of subjects. We started with a very kind of narrative that goes against everything, the textbooks and other such things, where we talk about the antiquity of the Indian civilization. These are the kind of things you're not going to find anywhere, especially not in Wikipedia, thanks to what Nupurji just talked about. You're not going to find any of those kind of places. But I embarked on an evidence-based narrative because I said the only credibility I have to talk in this area is I'm an engineer scientist. And so therefore I need to be in this way of looking at things. There is the evidence for any assertion. So I moved the dialogue away from the opinion of some heavyweight in social or liberal sciences on to those of scientific papers and so on and so forth. So the dialogue was moved such that if you want to battle with me, you're going to battle the papers I'm quoting. I'm quoting a bunch of published papers over there. You tell me if you have a problem with the data, with the methods, with the claims, and so on, and we'll have a discussion on that. So I moved the discussion away from an opinion that some heavyweight over here has given his opinion on what Indian civilization is and so on to an evidence-based narrative. So in Sangam Talks is a place where many of these ideas became popular, and I'm thankful to Rahul for having provided this forum for that. From that, I went to the next part of the discussion. I said if India is an ancient civilization, we should have evidence of accumulation of knowledge in various areas. Do we have evidence of accumulation of knowledge? So the next few talks I gave at Sangam were focused on showing great accumulations of knowledge, whether it is in astronomy, whether it's in mathematics, medicine, and all of these areas. We could show a citation trail going back tremendous distances into the past and showing an accumulation of knowledge. So with that, now I'm coming to selected episodes here and there. There's no main theme over here. It's only a curation of a few things that I have seen. I call that as wonders of ancient Indian engineering and sciences. I hope you like the curation of facts I put over here. So like I said, the background is India is an ancient civilization, contrary to textbook assertions that we have on these kinds of things. And a multidisciplinary, evidence-based approach that shows deep antiquity of the Bharatiya civilization, contrary to whatever we learn in textbooks and NCERT and other such places. And we can also show that knowledge systems have evolved and matured over very vast periods of time. These are not like Wikipedia or others assert that we learned from the Babylonians, from the Greeks, and so on and so forth. Rather, we can show it in this way. And what I've done here is I've just highlighted a few areas like architecture, marine tech, optics, and things of this nature. So the first thing I'd like to show you from sciences of the ancient times is to show you the technological prowess. Technology comes when we have a good understanding of the sciences, a good understanding of mathematics, and an application has taken place, right? So to show you from ancient structures to temples. So what I did was I went to the great friend of ours today, ChatGPT. And I told ChatGPT, you know everything about Dholavira. Consider all the published literature on Dholavira, the archaeological records and so on and so forth. Reconstruct to me how Dholavira would have looked. And also tell me where are the parallels with Vaasthu Sastra and Dholavira. And ChatGPT went spinning for some time and spin. Said, okay, I'm generating something for you. And it generated this amazing image over here. This is showing Dholavira in 2800 BC with a citadel. Citadel is a feature of all Indus cities. And that shows you over there. And then the middle town is shown within the fortified layer. And the lower town outside. And what you see is evidence of town planning, water management, and so on. And ChatGPT went on to enumerate all the ways it's aligned with Vaasthu Shastra. This is something a little discordant with us because we are told Vaasthu Shastras come with Vedic sciences, inverted quotes, and this has come to India after the Aryans have invaded India or migrated to India, whatever, 1500 BC, and Dholavira is clearly something pre-Vedic, but then we are seeing elements of Vaasthu Shastra over here. So this is one of those discordant notes that we see over here. Anyway, something pretty amazing that we can see from here. Then if you look at other Indus cities, again we see similar kinds of layouts. Whether you're seeing Mohenjo-daro or in Harappa, we are seeing that the citadel is always the higher ground, the western side. Lower town is always in the eastern side. And there are some principles they are following. And this is there throughout the Indus cities. Wherever you go, the similar kind of town planning appears to be there. And moving forward, and some beautiful images over here. Many of you might recognize this. This is from Gujarat, Rani Ki Vav. Amazing structure. When you look at this, built in 1050 current era, look at the symmetry over there. Look at the symmetry and look at the way it's constructed. This is truly the mind of an engineer at work over here. Engineers have got this compulsive disorder to put things in order and symmetry and things like that. Best way to annoy an engineer is to disturb the symmetry. So anyway, you see amazing structures at work and so on over here. And I hope several of you have seen Brihadishwara. If you have not seen the Brihadishwara temple in Thanjavur, it should be on your bucket list. This is something you have to see to understand what India was capable of. Unfortunately, in the north, you don't have examples of this thanks to the Islamic depredations. But in the south, thanks to Vijayanagar, we have got many, many Hindu artifacts surviving, and this is a major artifact that should be seen. One more of those instances, looking at Ellora in Maharashtra, going to 760 current era, a complete structure hewn out of a mountainside, completely done out of a mountainside. Imagine the architect at work over here. You have one try to get it right. There's no chance of error or losing out over here. And there's one more view of Ellora. You can see how magnificent this structure is over here. And we're talking about 760 current era. This is from Halebid in Karnataka, going to 1160 current era. I'd like to draw your attention to the pillars over here. Look at the pillars. The pillars seem to show sign of some kind of lathe, as if it's been put on a lathe and milled around and those kind of things. Highly polished kind of pillars, and it is, I'm not claiming they were lathes because of the multi-ton pillars. I don't think even today you can do that. But this is something amazing. Whatever engineering was done here, it is simply amazing. Going forward, this is in Rameshwaram, 11th century, destroyed and reconstructed again in 1750 current era. And look at the symmetry again. It's like rays of lights going to a point at the very distance. Amazing symmetry that you see over here. All these things I gave as examples of the technological prowess of our ancestors, the kinds of things that they were able to do. This is one more engineering marvel. This is from Konarak in Odisha, going to 1250 current era, the famous Sun Temple. And what amazed me was, in Konarak, we very luckily have got palm leaves that tell you how the temple was constructed. Thanks to a person called Alice Bonner, who spent a long time in that area and finally got palm leaves from that place, which show you how the temple was constructed. If you take a look at this, what we are seeing is the palm leaves are placed on one below the other, 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, those are all palm leaves. And put them one below the other, what do you see? You see the plan and elevation of the temple coming out over there. The plan and elevation of the temple are coming out 1250 current era. In engineering, we learn about first angle projection, second angle projection, third angle projection. We're told that these ideas came from Europe and places like that. But you're seeing over here what perhaps is a first angle projection right over here. So what we're seeing is engineering drawings on palm leaves showing plan and elevation. And going forward, the palm leaves show a whole. So the palm leaves show a whole lot of things. For example, the diagrams the architect has left. I can't point this laser pointer over there, but in the upper left, you see the diagram of the artist or the architect is conceptualizing what this work should be. On the right side is a completed structure. The photographs is a completed structure. So you're seeing these kind of amazing entities over here. And the description of the architect, you might not be able to read it from back there, but translating from the palm leaves, the architect is starting the homage to Ganesha. And after that, he's going on to saying, I'm going to record all the measurements from various parts of the temple. I'm going to lay out what it's going to be in which corner, how it is going to be done. So you have a master architect. Those of us are wondering, how did they build these temples? Did the king give a bag of gold coins to some shilpi and said, go do your thing? He takes a chisel and hammer and starts hammering away stones. This is the kind of mental image we have, right? But we know it is not possible. These kind of structures I showed you required enormous planning in an era when we didn't have CAD, CAM and things like that software to help us to do these things. And so he's laid out the complete structure on how to do it. And moving forward, you see, he's laid out in complete work orders, who's got to do what kind of activity, how much money should be paid. And the last line, which you can't read, he's saying to the inspector, so much of money should be paid. They even have a quality inspector who will take care to see whether things are going in accordance or not, a QA, quality assurance. That also has been considered in this kind of an engineering planning. And this blew me away. There's also pictures over there that show how the temple was built. What you see in the structures is pulleys. You have many, many pulleys that are shown over there. And you see elephants over here lifting these heavy structures up and so on. So it's pulleys and elephant power. And amazingly, the pulleys seem to indicate something called compound pulleys. Those of you who are mechanical engineers will understand that pulleys in a certain kind of configuration, like the picture in the middle that shows, that confers to you a mechanical advantage. If you have a very heavy weight, if you process it through a couple of pulleys and so on, you can extend a lesser effort and you'll be able to lift it. And as evidence of that, I've also shown coins from Karnataka in a place called Kuntala, 600 BC to 450 BCE. On those coins, you see compound pulleys. And these kind of compound pulleys have been used in Konark also to build a temple. But we are told compound pulleys were an invention of Archimedes. Archimedes is the one who invented them in 150 BCE and so on. But in India, we're seeing evidence of this coming from 600 BCE itself. We're seeing this kind of thing. So those of us who wonder, how did they lift these heavy stone structures onto these temples? Maybe this is one clue to us how these things came about. So that was one fascinating fact of technology in India, the kind of buildings we have, the kind of techniques they use, we can infer from that. One more thing I wanted to point out was the civil works in ancient India, and there are several of them. And I'd like to point out to you this amazing southern Indian river called Kaveri, the bone of contention between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu to share the waters, right? So Kaveri has its source in Talakaveri in Karnataka. It flows along happily, going from Karnataka, crosses over into Tamil Nadu, dammed at Mettur, and goes on. And it meets a place near Kumbakonam called Grand Anicut, is the sea here. And the delta, it goes and joins the Bay of Bengal. So this is this beautiful river, Kaveri. And it might amaze you to know that about 2,000 years ago, this king, Karikala Chola, he built a dam. The world's first dam was built across the Kaveri so that you can irrigate more fields over there and so on. So this is done, it's called the Kalanai Dam, which you can observe even today. And Nilakanta Shastri has put his date to 190 current era, but we have no way of verifying if that's a correct date or is much more earlier than that. I've gone conservatively with 190 current era. And this is the view of the dam as it is today. The lower layers are what was done during the Chola times. The rocks that you see, 2-3 layers of rocks. This was laid in the Chola times to change the course of the river to assist in irrigation and so on. The upper weirs that you see, that is done in British times, and the newer layers are over there. So the Kalanai itself is a massive dam, 329 meters long, and 20 meters wide across the main stream of the Kaveri. This engineering work was undertaken, like I said, 2000 years ago. Nowhere else in the world something as amazing like this is being done. People talk a lot about Roman engineering, Roman aqueducts and things of this nature, carrying water. But what you see here is engineering on a scale that is unimaginable for the period of time that we are talking about. And moving forward, this is an aerial picture of this Kalanai, how the Kaveri comes in over there. Because of this damming over here, we are seeing that canals take water away. On the lower right, you see two canals, the left and right. That allowed it to irrigate a whole lot of areas. And like is shown over there, this ancient irrigation network, which the dam was a centerpiece, covered 69,000 acres. That is how much the Cholas were able to irrigate. And even today, if we take a look at the empires in the south, the Cholas were the most successful people. The Cholas ruled over the Kaveri Delta. Because of things like this, they were able to grow rice crops, up to 2 to 3 rice crops in a year. And on the riches of the Kaveri Delta, they were able to build enormous navies. If you go to Kumbakonam and Tanjavur, you'll know what I mean. The power of Cholas can be seen there in the number of temples you have and things like that. They had huge navies that was going all the way to Sumatra, that was going to Java, that was going even up to China and ruling the seas, up to South China Seas. All that was done on the power of the Kaveri Delta. That is why they were able to rule it. And here is one instance where the ingenuity of their engineers allowed them to have this kind of prosperity in those times. And in the early 20th century, because of these new ways of irrigating it, today up to 1 million acres are irrigated by this particular river. And there's a factoid over here, which is a little disconcerting for most of us, that when the British, when they encountered this particular Kalanai, they wanted to widen the dam to make it little more deeper and so on. But where do you get the stones for that? So there's a British officer called Cotton. He suggested that we'll dismantle the temple that we call Gangaikonda Cholapuram. How many of you know Gangaikonda Cholapuram? Okay, some of you know that. It's like a replica of Brihadishwara. You're very close to it. They proposed dismantling this temple and taking the stones and widening that river. Shocking for those of us who loved this heritage of India to imagine that. But then the public, when they heard about it, they rose in such an uproar over there. So that plan was put away. So this is the picture again of the Kaveri Delta after the old delta shown over here, and below is a new delta. So you can see the amount of irrigation that is possible because of these ancient ideas. Once again, an instance of Indian ingenuity at work. From the deep south, we are seeing these kinds of things. And in accordance with this, we also have the maritime prowess of ancient India, right? So because we have a huge coastline, you can imagine that Indians have used this to their advantage in some form or the other. And evidence comes from a lot of places. Very first evidence comes from the Rig Veda itself. If you ask, did India have a maritime culture? Yeah, you go back to the time of Rig Veda, that's what they're talking about. In the first verse over there, we are seeing that in this English translation, he who knows the path of birds flying through the skies, abiding by the ocean, knows the path, the course of ships. Very cryptic kind of thing. Today, you've got GPS, satellite communication, and all these things to help you with navigation. But in the old days, what would you do? When you're out in the sea, deep sea especially, how do you know where you are? Yeah, you could look at the pole star and know your latitude, but do you know which direction land is in? So the method in those days was they carried birds with them, birds in cages. When they suspect they're close to the shore, then release one of the birds, and the bird will fly towards land by instinct and say, okay, land is there, let's go that side. So that's the way they did navigation. And Rig Veda is calling out that particular verse, that if you know the path of birds, then you know how to navigate the seas. In one more verse, it is talking about merchants who are crowding ships in order to go on a voyage for gain and so on. In other words, at the time when this verse is written, we already had merchant classes who had their own ships and they were doing trade with other civilizations or other places on ships. And the Rig Vedic verse in the middle is talking about that. The third Rig Vedic verse is even more intriguing. It is giving us a hint about the size of the boats itself, the ships I should say. It says Ashwini had rescued a shipwrecked sailor and taken him to his father's house, and it is making a reference to 100-oared ship. You know, the oars they use for sailing, there are 100 oars, which means 100 people were rowing that particular ship. That gives you a size of the idea of the size of the ship in the Rig Vedic time itself. And moving forward, we see that there have been a lot of merchant guilds in ancient India, whether it is in the Mauryan times or whether it is in the Chola times, Pallava times, and so on. I've given some instances from southern India over here. This is from the Tamil Nadu Archaeological Department. What you see on the right, upper right, are the emblems of these various communities. I have highlighted some of the community names over there. Typically to the Chettiars. The Chettiar communities were the Vaishyas who had enormous trade guild. They had so much of clout that they had enough money to build these huge ships and take them to various places. They're all private militia so that the ships can be protected against pirates and things of that nature. And they were operating these in the Bay of Bengal, Indian Ocean, all the way to South China Seas. There was a power vacuum there because the Chinese did not have a fleet of their own. Until 1400s, we don't see evidence of the Chinese fleet, and Ming Dynasty came about. So prior to that, it's the Cholas who were in this entire area, ruling this area. So that evidence has come out in this. And a French guy called Solvin, he came to India, and in those days, no photographs, right? So these are people who are artists who are going around sketching what they saw in India. So he sketched the various ships and boats that he found in Bengal, at least in that time frame. And he's given these beautiful pictures over here. You can see some of these are pleasure boats with a house in the center. Some of them are double mast. You see the one on the right, there are two masts over there with sails and so on. And moving forward, you can see several people rowing this ship on this side. And on the right side, you see triple mast, three masts. This kind of shipbuilding was not known in the Europe at all, but Indians were doing this kind of ships to navigate the seas. And on this side, once again, you see a selection of Indian ships with three masts and these kinds of things. And one might wonder, what happened? Where are these ships? We don't find them anymore, right? That must be in everybody's mind. If Indians had all of these things, what happened to these things? Well, there's a lot of clues on what might have happened. So we have Solvin, who wrote this French work called The Hindus. And there's a translation of that I got over here that says Hindus were at the forefront of the art of shipbuilding. And even today meaning 1799, they can teach a lesson or two to the Europeans. And the British were very apt at learning the arts, learned a lot of things about shipbuilding from the Hindus. There's a very good blend of beauty and utility in the Indian ships. They're examples of Indian handicrafts and their patience. And one more person, Dr. Taylor, is quoting, when Indian ships laden with Indian goods reached the port of London, clearly there was an Indian ship who went all the way to London, and this man is quoting there. It created such a panic among the British traders as would not have been created, but they had seen the enemy fleet of ships on the River Thames ready for attack. So basically he's saying that if Indians were to come to London and see the way the people lived in that time frame, which is very primitive in that particular time frame, they were afraid Indians will lose respect for the British. So they wanted to prevent Indians from coming to that area itself. That is what is coming out over here. And eventually it led to an end of the Indian shipbuilding itself, because the East India Company passed a law. Any zamindar building a ship or a boat would lose an entire village. The zamindars were in charge of villages, right? They would lose that particular one. Any carpenter or blacksmith working for such a zamindar will be imprisoned and whiplashed and so on. And we have seen that side I've quoted from which document this man has pulled these things out. And clearly we're seeing the British records that they killed the Indian shipbuilding industry with their policies. In fact, their policies that said every ship must have, most of the crew should be British. That itself killed the Chettiar network, right? They could not have the British complement, and they were all Indians doing these kind of things. So they broke the backbone of Indian trade and shipping with the policies they did. And unfortunately, today they have become a museum piece. This man, his name is, I think, Manikaffan, I could be mistaken, but he was awarded in the Republic Day Awards in 2021. He was given an award. And the reason is, he's from Lakshadweep. He's one of the last guys who knows how to construct this ancient Indian ships without any iron used and just with coir ropes and other such things. He was commissioned by an Irish adventurer, like I shown there, to build this ship that was there in the Indo-Roman trade times, for example, going all the way from Dubai to India and so on and so forth. So he built one such ship and he was awarded for that. So in a sense, he's maintaining that knowledge still. Yes, last his name is given, Ali Manik Fan. 82 years from Meenakoi Island, Lakshadweep. So we have basically become museum pieces. That whole technology is gone right now. But to give an idea of some of the wonders of Indian engineering, we had all of these things, but these things have been destroyed. Then coming on to the sciences of the ancient times, mathematics. This is the enabler of science and technology, right? What's an engineer without a decent understanding of mathematics? If you don't know math, you can't describe what's going on, forget it. You're just tinkering around, hoping something will work. So we see in the history of mathematics in India, there is an applied math process. Indians observed some phenomena in nature or some abstract idea that was out there, and with those observations and measurements of the process, they would either have an understanding of the physical relationships in which they build a mathematical model based on physical relationships, or some empirical understanding of what's going on, where they have some model with mathematics, things like epicycles. I'll show you those kind of things. Eventually, they'll use some processes of building a model with the observations. Going on to once you start using it for predictions, you have to do some refinements, you have to do some approximations, parameter estimation. Once you're sufficiently happy, then you can use that model for some prediction and tracking. Over a vast period of time, once again, it has got to be refined and so on. So what we're seeing in the history of Indian mathematical methods is identification of a phenomena, modeling its behavior, measuring it, refining the model, approximation of the process, estimation of parameters, tracking and prediction. I have deliberately used language that engineers use today to show you that all of this is present in the ancient Indian works if you were to follow the kind of methods that they have been using. And moving forward, we see once again an application-driven historical growth of mathematics. Initially starting with enumeration, counting of objects. You can go to Rig Veda itself. Rig Veda itself is talking about numbers. It's talking about addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, place value. It is talking about powers of 10. 10 power 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and all these kind of things. Then Rig Veda itself. It's also part of the Vedanga Jyotisha. The mathematics used for architecture, things like geometry, right angle triangle, circle, pi, square root. Examples are Baudhayana Sulba Sutra, Katyayana Sulba Sutra, Manava Sulba Sutra. All of these things have to deal with this kind of architecture. The mathematics of commerce, whether we're talking about arithmetic, algebra, solving equations, examples are there in Arthashastra, Bakshali manuscript of 220 current era, and so on. The mathematics of modeling, if you're modeling the skies, for example, right, celestial body movements, we are seeing trigonometry, spherical geometry, approximation, solving equations. Examples are Surya Siddhanta, Aryabhatiya, and so on. Very advanced modeling, things like function approximation, properties, polynomial series, infinite series, solution of equations, algebraic geometry, calculus, combinatorics, discrete math. All of these things, evidence is there in a whole host of works, whether it's by Pingala, whether it is by Madhava, the Yukti Bhasha, whether it is Ramanujan. We are seeing a whole lot of ideas. What does that tell you? It tells us that whether we go to Rigvedic times or come to Ramanujan who lived closer to our times, we are seeing a connected tradition of mathematics, right? Over a vast period of time, our ancestors have developed so many different techniques with clear application in different areas. This is what we see. And if we go looking for archaeological evidence of the use of mathematics, we don't have to go very far. Life in Harappa was pretty standardized, right? They had standard weights. Wherever you go, these weights are pretty standard. Bricks, always 4:2:1 ratio. Whether you go to Mohenjo-daro or Dholavira, everywhere we see the same thing. The layout of towns, very geometric layout of towns. We are clearly seeing the evidence of mathematics at work here. Again, what's an engineer without a scale, right? We got to have our scale to measure and things like that. And we are saying this is a civilization that had, for example, the Mohenjo-daro scale that is shown there, Lothal ivory scale, Kalibangan terracotta scale. These are not scales in inches and centimeters like you have today, but they had a different measure in those days, and this is the kind of scales that were used over there. What does a scale tell us? A scale tells us that this is a civilization that is investing in measurement. Why would you do measurement unless you're mathematically literate? You're mathematically literate, you're doing measurements for the purpose of using it for some model. You have some model, some way of applying it. All these things tell us that is a very mathematically literate society that is doing all of these kinds of things. And this is an amazing thing that came out some time back. in an ASI record. It is showing a pattern on the floor in an excavation in Kalibangan. Kalibangan is put to 2600 BC to 1900 BC. When I saw this pattern, I said, I've seen this before. I've seen this somewhere. It turned out to be in a mathematical handbook. And what is shown at the top over there, the curve described by a point P and a circle of radius as it rolls on the inside of the circle, different radiuses. That's what that pattern is. But there is a simpler explanation for that. Baudhayana has talked about it. Baudhayana is saying, how do we construct a square using circles? That is then Baudhayana Silva Sutra. And the next image shows you this. So in this sutra, we are seeing that if you drive a stake into the ground and tie a rope, it's so trivial to construct a circle. Just walk around at that extremal point, you can draw a circle. So he's got a procedure, how you draw the sequence of circles over there, eventually getting that square that you see. And that pattern, that four-clover pattern is exactly what you're seeing in Kalibangan and Tai flow, right? So what it is telling us is that something is wrong over here. Either Baudhayana is merely quoting what is known in ancient times, or Baudhayana's date that the Westerners are putting, anywhere from 800 BC to 200 BC, they place his date. That is wrong. Maybe Baudhayana should be placed somewhere near this time frame itself, closer to Kalibangan's time frame, because this mathematics seems to be popular over here, this time frame. Going forward, evidence of zero. So different cultures had different ways of dealing with zero. This Babylonians, for example, just had a blank space. That blank space gives so much of agony to people who are trying to decode that. I mean, do you use it as a zero or what is it and so on? So Indians had a zero and a symbol for the zero, and there's a lot of controversy of where did it come from. They thought that first thing came somewhere in Cambodia. Then it is said, okay, Gwalior temple has got an evidence of zero. Eventually they found that Bakshari manuscript, that itself has got zero in it, and the evidence goes back with carbon dating in Bodleian Library to 220 current era. That's when it was decoded. For example, in this work, you see that fraction, one fraction multiplied by another to produce this huge number. Clearly, zeros are a long division procedure with zeros. It is right over there. We also know about the evolution of Indian numbers, right? Starting from the Brahmi symbols that you see right at the top, going on by the time you come to the Gwalior temple, you're seeing the Devanagari symbols over there. That has gone through the Islamic invasions, it has gone to Arabia. And from there, it has gone to Europe, eventually evolving into this familiar figures that we see 1, 2, 3, 4, and all those things. By the 16th century or so, we got these numbers. So we also know that this is spread by the Arabs to Europe. And I'm glad to say I learned these things from Dr. C.K. Raju's works. He's a pioneer in some of these things. So it is his works that I learned about many of these things. And we also know that in this time frame, although there were some Europeans who had learned Indian mathematics, people like Fibonacci and several others, Isidoris of Deville, and there's a pope called Sylvester, they all had learned about Indian numbers, but they lived in an era when the printing press was not yet developed by Gutenberg, right? So their impact was very localized. They could not do that. It required this man at the top, the German called Adam Ries. In 1522, he wrote a work that showed how to use Indian numbers for computation. How he showed to his fellow computers, people who work with numbers, instead of using Latin numerals to do calculation, if you use Indian numbers, it is so much more easier. This work was printed in the printing press. Overnight, it became a sensation in Europe. Overnight, Europe discarded all the Latin numerals and started using the Indian numerals and place value and things like that from 1522 onwards. And some greats, we know about Brahmagupta, for example, lived in that time frame. And clearly, many of our greats, they have a citation trail. He's referred to works of Aryabhatta, Latadeva, Varamira, and others because he's criticizing them also, some of the methods. So the citation tells us that he did not work in a vacuum. He's worked with the works of his predecessors. He wrote his Brahmasputra Siddhanta, transmitted by Arabs, obviously. And we got the solution of linear, quadratic equations, and so on. Rules for zero operation, positive, negative numbers, interpolation, trigonometric tables, and the so-called Pell's equation. He had the general solution, particular solution, which even in Europe, for hundreds of years, their experts, Euler and others, they had no clue how to solve it. But 1,000 years earlier, he had given the general solution to these integral equations. Very, very difficult to solve there. Bhaskara I, who wrote a Bhashya on Aryabhatya. Aryabhatya wrote such terse works that's very difficult to understand what he did. It required a Bhashya by Bhaskara I to explain what is it Acharya may. And that's how we know about many of those methods. He had that analytical formula for the sine. Bhaskara II who wrote Siddhanta Shiromani. In his works, we are seeing the elements of differential calculus, so important for engineering today. We are seeing evidence of that with application to astronomy, for example, the greatest radius and things of that nature. And is given, for example, this differential of sine y dy equal to cos y. Things of that nature we see in his work. At highest point, instantaneous speed is zero. What we do use in calculus of variations. Madhava of Sangama Grama, all those infinite series that you see over there are attributed to him. All of those things that you see, that is an intellectual advancement of the Indians who were trying to predict the skies. We'll talk about that a little later. That they were in a quest to understand how can I predict the celestial bodies. Started with a linear prediction of motion, went on to a curved understanding of the space with analytical approximations. By the time we come to Madhava, the approximation has become an infinite series. That is what we see over there. And we have several alumni in his school, Parameshwara, Nilakanta Somayaji and others who continue that work. And Dr. C.K. Raju has said, Madhava, who has invented calculus, his works were transmitted through the Syrian Christian church a century before Newton, right? And later on appropriated perhaps by Newton in his fluxions idea and all of this kind of things coming out in a vacuum and such things. So I'll take a very, very small detour over here. We have modern inventions today that we cannot imagine the kind of intake routes that they have. And I'm going to give you one such amazing thing. There is a technique in engineering that is a workhorse of industries today called linear programming. Without linear programming, all industry is going to die today, right? Because every major company uses that to understand how to move men, materials, and things like that. So after World War II, the US military wanted ways to move men and material at least cost. And this person, George Danzig, he invented a method called simplex that could solve this linear programming, 1947. And today it is a workhorse, but it's exceedingly expensive in the worst case. It's exponential, meaning that if your problem is big enough, it is going to take a pretty long time to solve. But in the general case, it solves fairly easily, so people use it a lot. And we see that over time, people started working to improve this. And the first person was this person called Kachyan. Kachyan was a Soviet mathematician who said, instead of using the simplex method, which goes in vertex to vertex to solve it, why don't we instead use something called an ellipsoid method to solve it? And why it is important is because in theoretical computer science, it is something called polynomial time. But the polynomial is very high degree polynomial, very expensive to solve it. The person on the right, Narendra Karmarkar, he was employed by Bell Labs at the time, AT&T Bell Labs. And I think 1984, he came out with a method that he called a projection algorithm, which is an interior point algorithm. And this turned out to be pretty fast, much, much faster than all the other algorithms. And in the world, where Gaga, there were world headlines at the time in all the newspapers saying there's a breakthrough in this algorithm. And AT&T tried to sell this and make a ton of money and all those kind of things. Would it surprise you if I said the roots of linear programming can be found in the Bhaskari manuscript? You'll be shocked. Bhaskari manuscript, like carbon dated to 230 current era, it was written by a Pandit. In the opening lines, he says he did not invent anything there. He said, I merely have catalogued all the methods known to me because he was commissioned by a Vaishya to teach his son mathematical methods. In those days, we don't know mathematics. How can you do any commerce? You'll be cheated, right? In the Indo-Roman trade route, you'll be cheated right out there if you don't know math. For example, the Chinese gives you a gold coin and the Greeks give you another gold coin. If you don't know the relative weights and the ratios, you won't know what is the value of that gold coin, right? So you must know mathematics, ratios, all these kind of things. So over there, there's an example. I'm not going to bore you to death by reading all those things. But there's a problem mentioned over there at the top. One person possesses 7 of one kind of horse, 9 of another kind of horse, another has 10 camels. Each one gives 2 animals, 1 each to the others. Then they're all equally well off. Find the price of each animal, total value that they possess. You can write it in a set of equations that turns out to be the template for linear programming. So you can show the roots of linear programming are anticipated by the kind of works that our ancestors were trying to talk about. So I'm going to another area here now. When you talk about sciences, medical wonders, once again, I'm curating just a few things. This is not something that's exhaustive. Dental works. Would it amaze you to know that in Mehrgarh, we have uncovered artifacts 9,000 years ago in Mehrgarh, they were drilling into dental tissue. They had drills made out of flint and maybe a rope-based flint or whatever. They drilled into rotting dental tissue, removed the rot, and these things have healed. Today with X-rays and other such things, we can detect that, clearly showing the kind of medical practice Indians seem to have had in a very, very ancient period of time, right? Typically, we are told 9,000 years ago, we are just a Neolithic revolution, just becoming farmers, just getting settled. But you're seeing advanced methods like this already in that particular time frame. And we also see this curious phenomena where skulls have got evidence on drilling of holes in them. This is called this trepanation. It's not only in Harappa, even other places in the world we find it, but in Mehrgarh, Harappa and other places we have found this from cemetery hedge culture in 2300 BC. And if you look at the skull, the bones show signs of healing. Wherever you cut it, it has become smoothened, showing the bones have grown in that area. That person did not die after that procedure. So people even today wonder, why were Indians doing this? What was the significance of doing this? Some people have speculated that maybe the diet included pork. Pork that is contaminated with tapeworm, for example. In the life cycle of tapeworm, it also involves a human brain. So maybe this is done to let a finger go in or something and remove a tapeworm from the brain. I don't know, but people have speculated that's the reason for these kind of things. But clearly we are seeing some kind of, if I hesitate to call it brain surgery, but I think that's what it is. Some kind of a skull surgery is going on over here in Mehrgarh. Evidence of a prosthetic eye. This is admittedly near Balochistan. Balochistan is part of the Indus civilization. Burnt city I've shown is in Iran, but it is in cultural proximity with Indus Valley. Cultural proximity because the artifacts found in that grave are similar to what you find in the Indus civilization. So it's in cultural proximity. And this particular skeleton was seen having a bitumen eye, a prosthetic eye. And so clearly these are some medical processes that people were concerned with, even for cosmetic purposes and such things. Surgical instruments. So these are surgical instruments that were excavated near Takshila in Pakistan today. And these are in a museum in Pakistan, in Takshila Museum over there. And these are exactly the kind of instruments described by Sushruta. In Sushruta Samhita, we are seeing 121 surgical instruments referenced there. And this hoard of instruments was obtained in that area. And many of these things have got described by Sushruta for the kind of medical processes. If you imagine what would have required surgery other than the often quoted plastic surgery, what else would have required surgery? Gynecology, childbirth. Many complications could have occurred, and maybe the reasons to remove the fetus and things of that nature. So we are seeing many of those instruments are defined for those kinds of activities. Everybody knows this thanks to WhatsApp, right? So we have rhinoplasty that Indians are following, and the procedure was very interesting. So if people lost a nose thanks to punishment or war or whatever, the way the nose is fashioned according to Sushruta was you cut a flap on the forehead, the skin of the forehead, you cut a flap, not fully, so that the blood vessels are retained at the tip of the nose. You let that flap fall down, twist it around, fashion a bridge, and then let some herbs heal your nose. Eventually, you'll have an artificial nose. If you look at his forehead, you see signs of that skin, the scarring of that skin that has been cut to make that happen. So this is a rhinoplasty that was prescribed by Sushruta for these kinds of things. One more amazing advance that Indians had, we have evidence of inoculation. If you think that inoculation came from Edward Jenner, you must have a second thought coming, because Indians have already practicing this for smallpox, for cholera, and all these kind of things. Descriptions are there. Thanks to the British who recorded this, and no thanks to them because they killed it also, this practice. You're seeing this. This is a work in 1767. This man is saying inoculation is performed in Hindustan by a tribe of Brahmins. They divide themselves into small parties of 3 or 4 and plan their traveling circuits in such a way to arrive at places of destination some weeks before the return of the disease. In India, waterborne diseases come at monsoon times. So before the monsoon times, these groups of people have prepared all the necessary medical processes, planned who's going where, and do this kind of thing. In other words, there's an understanding of community health. There's an understanding that it's not just one person who needs to be vaccinated, but everybody needs to be inoculated. And that is the activity that you see. There's many more records of this. By the way, By 1865, the British banned this practice because they had their own medication coming out. Edward Jenner had already come on the scene, and several other things were done. So they banned the practice of Indian inoculation. That's why today no Vaidya you'll find anywhere in India who knows how to do this. At one time it was widespread. Throughout India it was widespread. People are doing this. Amazingly, when I gave a talk in USA some time back on this, a gentleman stopped me and said, "Do you know this practice is still there?" I said, "What? Tell me, I want to know about this." And he said, "Well, this practice is not on humans, but it is practiced on animals." In Andhra Pradesh, and there are some places where they maintain this pox from infected cows, and they use this process to inject their fresh cows so the cows will not fall ill. So this traditional practice continues to be there in some villages, but only on animals, not on humans anymore. This is one more amazing thing that caught my eye. The use of glass. How old is the use of glass in India? Many people tell us it came from the Romans, it came from Mesopotamia, it came from various other places and such things, in line with what they normally say. We'd like to investigate glass, lens, and optics. Was they even known in ancient India? We are seeing in Harappa itself. In Harappa, we are seeing evidence of the use of glass, except it is called faience. That means they have a ceramic object on which there's a coating of glass. There's a coating of glass with some material they've used. The material could be either silica or crushed quartz. They crush the quartz and fire it in a kiln, right? By doing that, there's a coating, a glassy coating that is given. It is glass, but it was used for these purposes. On the left side is the monkey that is with the glass. On the right side, many other artifacts of this one. And this from a famous archaeologist who worked on that site. So from 3300 BC onwards, we have evidence of glazed ceramics from clay or quartz, but clearly it is glass. And if you take a look at the literary evidence in Hindu works, we are seeing glass used most of the places. For example, in this work, Ancient Glass and India by Sen and Mamata, we are seeing that in Sanskrit itself there are words for glass. In Yajurveda, it is mentioned as one of the articles on which ornaments for ladies are made by stringing beads with gold thread. And you also see Shatapatha Brahmana. It is mentioned over there, meaning glass beads to decorate the horses, for example, Ashwamedha sacrifice. Taittiriya Brahmana, that is also talking about glass beads of different colors and so on. Don't worry about the dates. The dates are all nonsense. Many of our own historians have been seduced by this Aryan invasion migration nonsense. And all these dates are subject to those kind of ideas. We can show through the astronomy contained in Shatapatha Brahmana that it should be placed in a much earlier time period. At least that part of it is in 2900 BC and so on. So none of these dates are relevant. But the fact is that glass is mentioned in our ancient texts. That is the bottom line. That is the data that we're taking out of this one. And this work has also compiled other pieces of information. In the Ramayana, for example, glassmakers, they are also part of the citizens of Ayodhya who are following Bharata when he goes out to persuade Rama to come back. Mahabharata is also referring to glass. Charaka Samhita and Shushruta Samhita, they are saying you should use glass vessels for preserving medicines, and is also recommended for serving foods, glass vessels, and so on. And it's also said that glass is a better substitute for surgical instruments instead of using copper and bronze to use glass instruments. And there's a difference between different kinds of glass, whether it's making out of silica or whether you're making out of quartz and so on. So clear evidence is there that Indians had glass. Now, I ask a question. If you have glass beads in your culture, somebody is making glass beads, how difficult is it for some inquisitive youngster to go to all the discards of the beads that are discarded, pick up a bead that's got a convex structure or something like that and say, hey, I can see the sun's rays in my hand if I shine it through this. And how difficult is it to see it magnifies? How difficult is it to take two beads and place them one below the other and saying, hey, I can see objects much closer? Right? You can imagine that a lot of discards that have been there in the jewelry making industry. By the way, I did not mention one thing in my talk. Indians use diamond drills. The first in the whole world, diamond drills were used for these glass beads to make the holes in them and things of that nature. So, like I said, having glass, it is not difficult to conceive that people would have understood the lensing phenomena itself coming out of that. And if you look at Vaisheshika Sutra, this is not talking about light rays. about light rays, the fundamentals of physical optics. And the date for Vaisheshika that I put around 1800 BC follows from the kind of work that I've been doing. If you take the traditional date of Gautama Buddha to 1800 BC, Puranic dating, then Vaisheshika should be placed, Rishi Kanada's placed earlier than him. That's the timeline over there. And you see, light rays are supposed to consist of infinitely small particles which dart forth or radiate in all directions rectilinearly with inconceivable velocity. This is what it says in the Vaisheshika Sutra. So there's a clear understanding that light is composed of rays, straight lines and rays. And this idea percolates not only from Vaisheshika. By the time you come to Aryabhatta, Aryabhatta is now discussing eclipse phenomena based on ideas of, if I have something like a huge lamppost, the sun actually, and let's say one more lamp, which is the earth over here, and the moon is over here, then he's talking about an extremal ray coming from there, falling over here. Will the shadow be on the earth and moon and things of this nature? He's using right angle properties with the idea that light travels in straight lines. So this idea is there in the Indian civilization before Al-Haytham came onto the picture, or before anybody else of physical optics came on the picture. Indians have had a clear understanding of light rays. Evidence is there at least from Vaisheshika. So we also see the last line that's said there. Al-Haytham, one of the famous scientists in the Arabic tradition. So he worked on optics, and the Westerners love it because that was the basis of their own optics. So we know that Arabs are schooled on Indian texts on mathematics, sciences, astronomy, medicine through translations of Sanskrit works from 711 current era onwards. And his work was used later by Western scientists in optics. And this is a map that shows where are the archaeological sites where glass has been found. And we can see all over India in a very early period of time. This is not talking about later periods. A very early period of time, we are seeing ancient sites all over India, including in the south. You see in Pudukkey. Pudukkey is where Arikamedu is, where they made glass beads and so on. There is documented use of lens and spectacles. Many of you may be shocked by this, but Adi Shankara uses the metaphor of a lens where he's discussing Advaita. He's using that particular, I put that quotation over here from the work that is shown on the right, highlighted work. He's saying, just as all objects that are very small appear to be large when viewed through lenses, he's using that metaphor to communicate a certain idea in Advaita, right? And so the word of lens, he's using that. And that is what caught my eye. How is that possible? So Adi Shankara, there's a dispute about his date. Did he live in 509 BC? Did he live in 728 current era? Doesn't matter. But the point is, by that period of time, this has already entered the lexicon of people as a metaphor to be used, showing a widespread understanding of the lensing phenomena. That's what we're seeing over here. And if we look at the origin of spectacles itself in India, so this is a paper by this Rishi Kumar Agarwal in 1971, British Journal of Ophthalmology. So he's saying that there's a lot of controversy. The Europeans say that spectacles was invented in Italy by some spectacle maker in 1350 current era or something like that, and it is spread all over the world and things of this nature. But he's giving evidence that in the Vijayanagar kingdom, there was this person called Vyasaraya in that time frame shown over there. So he used spectacles at the age of 74 to read a book in 1500 current era in the court of King Krishnadevaraya. So there's clear evidence of spectacles were used in India in that time frame. Westerners promptly said that the Vijayanagar kingdom was trading with the Portuguese, and the Portuguese must have gifted them some spectacles, but they cannot rule that out, except that there is one more piece of evidence. There is this person, I can't read the name from back here, there's Devanarayanan in Sri Lanka. So in the time frame of 1344 to 1353, it is said that he was an Indian architect who was commissioned from India to build a Buddhist monument. And it has got the style of Vijayanagar art, Vijayanagar style of architecture. Therefore, they say it's come from the Hindu empire of Vijayanagar. He apparently made spectacles. And this Devanarayan, this is what the tradition says over there. So it says that even before Portuguese contact, Indians were using spectacles. This is the thing that has come out over here. And this leads us to the mystery. The mystery is that in Hampi, we have this temple engraving, which is shown on the upper left over there, where one of the figures seems to be looking through some tube. We have no idea what the tube is, but it's looking through some tube, so evocative of using a telescope for maybe looking at sight, not astronomy and things like that. And what we see is that this Arabian work, 1001 Nights, which is basically from Indian translations, this work was done in the 9th century. The princess gives the hero an ivory tube with glass at both ends, capable of seeing whatever he desired. So whatever he desires, he has to see. There's glass at both ends and he can see it. So this is clearly maybe a description of a telescope, but it has come from India because the translations are done from India over here. I already talked to you about Al-Hayatan. Now what surprised me is to read the work by Dharampal. Dharampal, in discussing technology in ancient India, he says the British records talk about this person called Pierce in the Royal Society in 1783. He's describing a book that is centuries old, saying that Jupiter is shown with 4 dancing girls. Brahaspati with 4 dancing girls. Now, if you take even a modest telescope and look at Jupiter, you'll see the 4 so-called Galilean modes, right? Io, Callisto, and all these kind of things. You're going to see that. But how on earth is that showing the same thing over here? Saturn is shown as 6 arms and shadows, implying the arms are movable. 7th arm of Saturn holds a crown and 4 parts, showing the 4 concentric rings. This is a time when Europe didn't even know that more than 5 moons of Saturn. Additionally, that particular Brahmin had tables for 108 comets, some with straight tail, curved tail, fuzzy tail, and such things. Well, for the time of Varamira itself, there have been lists of comets. Some comets are visible to the eye, we can show these things, but some comets you do need some visual aids to see that. So the amazing thing to me, I still don't know how to describe this, but it looks like all the ingredients were in place in Hampi, in Vijayanagar Kingdom, in order to make a telescope. So the evidence seems to be pointing, at least empirically, that device, that picture, that figure is holding, could be a telescope. Like I said, glass beads are no. Glass beads have got convex shape and things like nature, the ideals of a lens. Take the objective and take the eyepiece and you can see a telescoping effect with a certain focal length. It could well be that. This is an example of a Mughal era emerald lens spectacles in 1600s. Not much of a surprise, but I found this picture somewhere and I thought it's nice to add it to this. One more example where mathematics meets astronomy in India. Just to show the technological prowess of ancient Indians, just to give some simple ideas, we have 5,000 years of instrumentation. 5,000 years, whether you go to Harappa and look at water clocks, or all the yantras described by Aryabhatta, Varamira, Brahmagupta, Bhaskara I, Lalla, Mahendra Suri coming down to Islamic times, to Jai Singh coming down to colonial times, we have got so many different yantras to measure celestial phenomena in the skies. Remember what I said? Measurement implies a model. Measurements implies mathematics. Measurement implies some kind of prediction, because a model is not something you develop for the sake of a model. You're going to use it to predict something, right? So all these things are inferred by looking at 5,000 years of history. So we'd like to dig a little deeper into this to see whether what else did Indians do with these things. So by the way, some of the things I've shown there, water clocks are shown in that middle figure, 3 water clocks over there. On the top right is a brick platform I found in Lothal, which nobody over there has a clue what it is. But then Bhaskara the First, he's describing a circular platform with a graduated circumference. So it could have been an astronomical observation point where you reference where the stars are with respect to that. The photo that is shown at the bottom, that is called a Goli Yantra. A Goli Yantra is described in Bhaskara II, in Siddhanta Shiromani, as well as in Surya Siddhanta, describes how to construct that object. In addition, how to use that is an orifice through which you view Revati first. You find Revati, then you make the adjustments and you find out where the star is. You can read off what its coordinates are with some transformations. We had no idea about those devices till at least I saw this one. This is from a Rajasthan museum. This from Flickr, I got this photo. In Rajasthan, the Kota Palace, they kept one of these Goli Yantras. So we know how Indians use this kind of device. Vedanga Jyotisha. This is a 1400 BC text, and it could be authored by Lagada or it is quoting Lagada, one of the two things. And this has got, intriguingly, something called the rule of 3. The rule of 3 in our modern mathematics is shown on the top right over there. A by B equal to C by X. You know A, B and C. You don't know what X is. Do cross multiplication, you get the value of X, right? Very simple high school level understanding. But then Lagada is saying, apply this rule again and again to the known result till you get the final result that you want. And to give an understanding what this is, I said, if Mars is over here today, 2 days later Mars has moved so much, I measure the time duration and how much Mars has moved, and I want to know where Mars will be 8 days from now. So in samples of 2 days, I can say, oh, it is here now, that the next 2 days is going to be here, next 2 days, and so on. I can use this known formula, this A by B equal to C by X, in an iterative way, like I shown that formula over there, in order to understand where Mars is going to be. Now, the sky is not linear, sky is curved, so my estimation could be in error. I could estimate even for a year if I want, but it will be deeply in error. But in any way you could do that. That's what you're seeing over here. And I've also shown that if you take it in our modern mathematics, at least the denominator delta t as a limit goes to 0. I know I'm talking with Professor Raju here. I'm scared to say this because I know his thoughts on this. You see the precursors to calculus itself over here that's coming in over here. So our Indians also observed that space is curved. Linear is not enough. We had to go beyond linear. What is this telling us? They had a model. They tried to apply that model to reality. They found that observation does not match our theory. That means there's an error. They were curious enough to understand what is the source of that error. What kind of innovation can I do to overcome that error? All this intellectual tradition we are seeing in what Indians have done in the invention of trigonometry. Now, the Westerners love to say Hipparchus is the father of trigonometry. But what we see is they had chord tables. In Ptolemy's work and others, we see chord tables. That is not trigonometry. You can relate it to trigonometry. Trigonometry is right angle triangles. And we're seeing that with Surya Siddhanta, for example. We are seeing it in places like that. So anyway, here is an example of sine tables from Surya Siddhanta. Very interesting. Look at the formulas that I've shown in that box over there. That is the way Indians were able to compute values of sine with a certain kind of resolution. They're able to compute the sine tables. Why did they compute sine tables? In order to use it in the theoretical calculations to understand celestial body orbits, to understand them in the movement, they needed these values. It was a ready reckoner. They'll use it for things of that nature. We have evidence that Indians work towards higher and higher accuracy, functional approximation. When Aryabhatta did his work, he did linear interpolation for function values. Bhaskara the first, he's used some analytical function for sin x and to do his work. By the time you come to Brahmagupta, that linear is no longer good enough. He has used second order interpolation. He wants higher accuracy. He's finding that using Aryabhatta's method, I'm not getting the accuracy that I want. My model is predicting Mars will be there, but my observation is showing it is there. Clearly, it is a mistake. But if he uses second order formula, he's saying it did better. Then by the time you come to Madhava, in 1400s in Kerala, he's used infinite series for sin x, cos x, tan inverse x, and all these kind of things, because even that accuracy was not good enough for him. What does it tell you? It is telling us that Indians, clearly we have evidence of observation, modeling, understanding the error, refining that through novel understandings, novel methods and such things. Everything shows advancements. Indians are advancing further and further in these areas of mathematics. That is what it is showing us. Then how did Indians locate objects in the sky? We had the nakshatra model. Everybody knows nakshatra model is there and so on. How do you communicate it with somebody? How do you tell somebody that nakshatra is there, that is there? Because it's not going to be there 1 month later. 1 month later at 8 o'clock at night, that nakshatra is not there. It's somewhere over there. So how do you tell people where the nakshatra is? Indians had a coordinate system. People are shocked when they hear that. Just like we use latitude and longitude today to understand GPS coordinates, Indians had a celestial coordinate system in order to map where the celestial bodies were. And in particular, we had something called ecliptic coordinate system. Ecliptic is the apparent path of the sun as it appears to go around the earth. That is the cutting plane that divides the celestial globe into the upper and lower half. So if there was a star in the sky that I wanted to locate, two measurements, two angles will tell me how I can locate that particular one, the ecliptic coordinate system. What you're seeing is one is at altitude, that beta that you see, that lambda is the distance to the ecliptic, and that ecliptic, basically the zero reference meridian, coincides with vernal equinox. Where vernal equinox, called the first of Aries, that is the zero line. And because a sidereal measurement was used, sidereal meaning the vernal equinox was described with respect to a star in the background. Unfortunately, that is not going to be true forever because Earth is undergoing something called precession of equinox, where the axis of rotation, where it is pointing to the sky, is tracing a path that takes 26,000 years to complete. Because of that, over a 1,000-year period, things have changed significantly so much that your reference longitude is no longer correct. So it necessitates change in the calendrical system, whatever you're using. So there's some evidence that things of that nature have been happening. For example, the nakshatra at vernal equinox in 4000 BC was Mridashesha. It went to Rohini in 3000 BC, went to Kritika in 2300 BC. It went to Bharani and finally Ashwini in 800 BC. The version of Surya Siddhanta that Burgess got to translate has got a list of nakshatras that starts on Ashwini, saying that that particular revision must have been done around 800 BC. Every time the reference was changed, Indians had to once again translate these coordinates to the new system. So all this evidence is present in the Indian works. And going forward, here are some of the coordinates. You can't read it from back there, and I'm struggling to read it from here too. So from the coordinates on Burgess' translation of Surya Siddhanta is what you're seeing over here. So it's called Swabhoga. If you look at the Surya Siddhanta in one of the chapters, there are intricate numbers, 47, 56, 75, things of this nature. If you don't know what it is, you'll scratch your head wondering what it is. But the formula, how to use that is, you take a Swabhoga and multiply it by 10. So that number 48 multiplied by 10, you get 480. That 480 is in arc minutes, which you can convert into degrees and minutes and seconds and so on. That is giving you the position of that, a longitudinal position of that particular nakshatra. Ashwini was in that particular longitude and so on. And the nakshatras, 27 of them, they span 360 degrees. Therefore, in a uniform reckoning, each nakshatra is 13 and 1/3 degrees. So that span can also be inferred from these kind of tables. So this is the way Indians had a coordinate system for the skies. Most people are shocked when they hear this because they ask, whoa, really? They had all these things? But yes, our education system doesn't talk about these things. But yes, Indians had these things. We have evidence that calendar system changed with time and these coordinates had to change. The first in the nakshatra list would keep changing with time. How did Indians track celestial objects? Things like all the planets, they move around all the time, right? How did they do that? How did they didn't have a planetarium software? How did they do that? Well, there's a procedure. Indians use the epicycle model to track movement of sun, moon, and planets. The first thing that we find evidence is there, at least from Surya Siddhanta. It tells you how many revolutions of the heavenly bodies in one Chaturyuga. One Chaturyuga is 4.32 million years. In 4.32 million years, how many times that Mars go around? How many times the moon go around? How many times the sun go around? How many times the Saturn go around? Jupiter go around? These constants have been understood by every Siddhanta practitioner in India. They try to refine it little here and there. Every Siddhanta practitioner knew this is a fundamental thing, understanding how many revolutions in a Mahayuga. From that, we can understand what is a daily mean motion. If I know the duration of the Mahayuga is 4.32 million years, then from that I can compute if that is the number of revolutions it does, 360 degrees multiplied by that much. I can now compute every day how much does it move. How much the sun, the moon move. Moon moves by 13 degrees, 13 1/3 degrees in the sky. Similarly, Mars moves by a certain amount. So that is a daily mean motion. Now, Indians, after understanding this, they also knew what is the constants at Kali Yuga time for Ujjain. At Kali Yuga time, they presumed that all the planets are clustered at Kali Yuga, 3102 BC. All the planets are clustered. So the reference at Kali Yuga is 0 degrees. They're all at 0 degrees. Then they computed something called Ahargana. Ahargana would be how many days have elapsed from the beginning of Kali Yuga till the time I'm interested in. If I'm interested in October 19th, 2024, I see how many days have elapsed from Kali Yuga till present time. If I have the number of days, I can multiply it by the daily mean motion and I can get the mean position. Where's the mean position of the planet? Now, the mean position is not correct because we have assumed circular orbits, whereas we know there are elliptical orbits. They also did something called Desantara correction for local coordinates, not important. The next one is epicycle theory was used to compute the actual position. So Indians presumed that the mean motion is one big epicycle and the true position can be found on a smaller epicycle. The planet is going on a smaller epicycle around the Earth in this larger circle. If I want to find out the true position, I must figure out where it is on this. And they had intricate mathematics to do that. That's where sine, theta, and other things come in that particular formulation. So after having done that, they do additional corrections. What you should understand when looking at this is enormous intellectual tradition was there, at least for the time of Aryabhatta, at least for the time of Surya Siddhanta. These things are present over there to do these kind of activities. And there's a scientist called Anil Narayanan who lives in Washington, D.C. So he made a study of this. He made a study to see how accurate were the Greek models of epicycle and the Indian model. In the Greek model, the radius of the epicycle, the small circle you see on the left, that was constant. Whereas in the Indian model, on the right, it goes through a contraction and expansion depending on which quadrant it is in. It goes, the radius expands or becomes small. Evidence is there from works like Brahmagupta's works, from several other works. We got evidence there are two radiuses to be used over here. So we had this kind of an epicycle model. He was interested in knowing how accurate were these models to predict where the sun will be. I want to find out the true position of the sun over the course of an entire year. And he used the Greek model, and he used the Indian Surya Siddhanta model, and he drew the graph at the top left that you see. There is a dashed line and there's a strong line. The strong line is the Indian model, dashed line is a Greek model, and on the y-axis is the error. On the x-axis, the number of days, up to 360 degrees, 365 days. So you're seeing that the Indian error grows much smaller than the Greek error. There are two curves there. One is for the year 100. Why is year 100 important? That is when Ptolemy lived, right? We are told that everything was copied from Ptolemy. So at Ptolemy's time, what was the error in the Indian graph? What is the error in the Greek graph? You can see even in Ptolemy's time, the epicycle model of the Greeks shows so much of error, whereas the Indian epicycle model is much, much less in error. Now, what Anil Narayanan did is, he's written a program to do this. He said, I want to find out in which year is the Indian model least in error. So he kept simulating it till he went to 5000 BC, that highlighted curve. That is when that sinusoid of error is the smallest curve that you see. I don't know what to make out of it. But then it appears that in 5000 BC, the parameters given in the Surya Siddhanta seem to be the best in that time frame. This was also observed by a British colonial historian called Brennan. Brennan wrote a work called Hindu Astronomy. So if you read that, he says that the epoch of Surya Siddhanta with epicycle parameters of the sun appears to be accurate around 3500 BCE. This is what Brennan said in 1800s. Anil Narayanan simulated that in 5000 BC the error is smallest. What do we make sense out of this? I don't know what to say, other than there's a fact. From the simulations we can see these things. So I'm come to the end of my talk over here. It is obligatory to talk about metallurgy. My apologies that I did not put Indian metallurgy over here, other than a remark that Indians are masters of metallurgy in ancient India. Evidence is there all over the place. We have the Chalcolithic era, at least from 4000 BCE, evidence of copper in India and working on copper. Then some brilliant person in India, some brilliant man, he figured out that if you add tin into copper, it becomes bronze. And the bronze civilization age was born in India around 3000 BC, and evidence is there all over Harappa for that. We have evidence of iron in India, at least from 2200 BC. Where is that evidence coming from? In Gachibowli, Hyderabad. Some years ago, there was a Professor K.P. Rao. In the University of Hyderabad campus, excavation over there, they found knives and blades and things like that. And they've done OSL dating on these kind of things and all kinds of dating. And then it comes to around 2200 BC. It is amazing because we were told that Aryans brought iron into India from Central Asia in 1500 BC. But in India, you're finding iron much earlier. It also demonstrates that Indians had technology to achieve these very high temperatures. Because if you're going to make these metals out of the ore, then you must have that kind of temperature. Copper, for example, melts at 1084 degrees centigrade, iron at 1536 degrees centigrade. Indians are capable of doing this in this time frame. And evidence of Urukku. Urukku is a name given to steel in Karnataka, in Tamil Nadu and places like that. The British call this Woods steel, very high quality steel. And the evidence is there all over the country, right? Ashokan pillars and all these things that are not rusting at all. Evidence of some very high technology at work to make these things. Also, in Chola Kingdom and other places, we see this lost wax process of making bronze works. If you've seen Nafraja statues and Panchaloha statues and things like that, they have basically come from this. So there's no doubt at all that Indians were experts in metallurgy, in various kinds of metals. There's no need for me to talk much about that. So given one sample, why do we even bother with all of these things? Because we need to understand the arc of time as it goes through technology over here, right? So sample of how theory of present-day technology arcs back in time to ancient mathematical innovations. All of us today happily use digital communications, whether it is your cell phone, Netflix streaming service, or whatever have you, we're using digital communication. Few of us understand what's under the covers, what is happening over there. Well, if you go, we have got analog and digital ICs and things like that doing their job. Let's work from the bottom. If it's an analog system, it requires to use Fourier series, Fourier transforms, fast Fourier transforms, Z transform, cosine transform, all kinds of compressions and things like that. And this is the present day. Where did that come from? These kind of functional approximations came from functional approximations works by Parameshwara, Madhava, who worked on series expansion, sine, and so on in 1300s. And they themselves have relied on trigonometry and Surya Siddhanta from at least 600 BC or so. And that also could not have been possible if Brahmagupta, for example, did not show rules for negative numbers, solving linear, nonlinear equations, and so on. They themselves relied on Vedic literature for zero, place value arithmetic, shift and add, multiplication. All these things are there in the analog system. You cannot talk anything in analog electronics, if the theory part of it at least, not the technology, the theory part of it, if you don't understand all of these things. The ecosystem clearly goes back to ancient India. If you look at the digital side, a similar kind of thing. At the bottommost, we use EDA tools from Synopsys, Cadence, Mentor Graphics, and all these things to design our IC chips and such things. And we do synthesis, optimization, verification, such things. Where did they come from? You cannot do this unless you have a grammar of 0-1 operations. That comes from people like Boole, George Boole, De Morgan. They are the guys that came with rules of Boolean operations 19th century and so on. But then we also have evidence that Mary Everest Boole, who was the wife of this George Boole, she wrote a letter to Jagdish Chandra Bose, who lived in 1901, that time in India, saying that both Boole and De Morgan were greatly influenced by Colebrook's translation of Indian logic, a work on Indian logic, Nyaya Sutras, and for example, A and not A, things of that nature are there in these kind of ancient works. They were influenced by things of that nature to come up with their methodologies. And again, that same ecosystem, if you go some little further back, 10th century, you're seeing Hemachandra, who worked on combinatorics. Combinatorics is such an important part. We talk about computer algorithms, enumeration, counting, graph algorithms, and things of that nature. You need combinatorics. That comes from his work. How many ways are there to arrange a short beat and a long beat if I have, let's say, n positions to be there? So that kind of mathematics is done in combinatorics by Hemachandra. Again, going a little further back, Pingala in Chanda Shastra, you see elements of the truth table over there. Truth tables are the basis of many of our binary operations and things like that. That evidence is there in Pingala's works. If you go even further back, Nyaya Sutra and things like that, we have so many darshanas that talk about logic, right? Different kinds of logic and so on. So the ecosystem clearly shows we cannot be here today if you're not standing on the shoulders of your ancestors. This connection has been disconnected in Wikipedia, in Western literature and so on, who say we learnt everything from the West and we had nothing at all. But the evidence is clearly showing to us that origins of everything in mathematics and engineering comes from this part of the world. So on how ancient is the Indian civilization, I have several talks over there, Sangam talks. Please do take a look at that. Indian Civilization Untold Story, Debunking Aryan Invasion, Who are the Indians? Answering this question holds the key to appreciating ancient Indian science and technology. If you cannot address how ancient Indian civilization is, you'll buy the story that we are Aryan invasion 1500 BC, we are illiterate people because they didn't have a script, right? These invading Aryans didn't have a script. Illiterate fellows who had an oral tradition running around in India with caste, cow, curry and all that nonsense. Till Magadha made contact with the Greeks. 300 BCE, Alexander came, suddenly we had Brahmi script, suddenly we became civilized and literate. This is what we are told. So you'll buy all this nonsense that... but if you can understand the antiquity of the Indian civilization, with great accuracy you can reconcile these facts. You cannot reconcile these facts if you buy 1500 BC. That's a constraint that you must break those chains and throw it. Once you do that, then you'll be able to do these things. So my talks address that. And how did this knowledge go out of India? Professor C.K. Raju has worked a lot on this. I have learned a lot from his works and other people's works. I've summarized some of that before Pythagoras, during the time of Pythagoras, Democritus, after Alexander, Buddhist and Hindu outflows of China, Southeast Asia, to the Muslims, Abbasid Empire, Delhi Sultanate, Mughal period, colonial period. In every period of time, we can show that Indian knowledge has gone out of India to various places. Two of my talks over there that summarize some of those things. Okay, so in conclusion, we can show that India has a deep history going back several thousands of years. Knowledge systems are developed in the Indian civilization over a very vast period of time, and I've only sampled a few contributions of ancient Indians in architecture, mathematics, and astronomy. And my last line, our present-day technological world owes immensely to the mathematical innovations of Bharat. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.